So you need to leave Joe Lara's monkey alone. This is a review of Tarzan in Manhattan, which is a TV movie that aired in the late 80s on CBS, and it is available right now to watch on Amazon Prime with your subscription and for free on Tubi. And no offense to the late Joe Lara, who you can see over my shoulder here, I wasn't thinking I was going to enjoy this one. I had read something online. Just about the only thing I could find online was a mention in this article featuring all these different Tarzan movies, and for some reason it threw this TV movie in with the big screen ones and said the less said about this movie the better. And I was just thinking, God, this must be horrible, irredeemable movie. I'm gonna hate it. And then I watched it, and oh my God, I gotta say, I've never had more fun with anything Tarzan in my entire life. I've never laughed that much at Tarzan in any media before. I had such a great time with the first half of this movie. First of all, let's just state a few obvious things. This is not the novels, and this is not a movie that takes itself seriously. But I could also say that about most of the screen appearances of Tarzan in the last 9 years. It's lighthearted and a little cheesy, but again, that is very in keeping with older Tarzan movies. It's very in keeping with 80s shows. And it is a TV pilot movie. This is essentially just a long pilot. It's made on a TV pilot budget, so you cannot anticipate that this is going to equal the feats you're going to see in a big screen movie. So the movie begins with this glorious jungle scene. I mean, no matter what version of Tarzan you're into, this pretty much is going to capture it. He's swinging through the jungle. The jungle is lush and green, and just all around him looks beautiful. There are animals, and he does the Tarzan yell, and it's just really cool. Cheetah the chimpanzee is in there. Joe Lara gets to ride an elephant early on in the movie. Just a lot of your traditional Tarzan tropes. Now, I will say his hair is a little too pretty looking to me. I know some people's hair gets naturally curly if it grows too long, and maybe that's what they were going for, but I just feel like it looks too prim and proper for someone who lives in the jungle. I definitely like the way they did his hair in Tarzan the Epic Adventures better. And it may also be worth noting that Joe Lara does wear boots. This is the first time he would wear the Tarzan boots. For some reason, this would be, kept in the next couple Tarzan TV series where Wolf Larson and then Joe Lara in Tarzan the Epic Adventures would both wear boots. Not sure where it came from. I know it bothers some people. I don't really care myself, but I just wanted to mention it. I thought the scripting for the first part of this movie, the first half, was really strong, but the directing, it definitely gets a little cheesy. I'm not sure if that's intentional or unintentional, but for instance, when Kala dies, his ape mother, it comes off as a very kind of cheesy, hokey scene as opposed to something powerful. There's a glorious scene where Tarzan gets on top of a bus and rides it through Manhattan. And, it's so great because people are looking up and waving at him and stuff. But when they do the close-up of him, on top of the bus, it's green screened or blue screened or whatever it was at the time in a really fake, obvious way. Again, not sure if it's intentional or unintentional. There were a lot of limits to what you could do on TV at the time and a lot of limits to special effects. So this is actually Joe Lara's first major role as far as I can tell. I think this is like the second time he'd ever acted. He does a great job. Tarzan here is actually, this is modern day. He was orphaned when his parents' plane crashed in the jungle when he was very young, probably too young to really remember much. And so he grows up in the jungle, and there's this black guy who gives him books and stuff to help him read. Obviously, Kala, raises him from childhood, but, this black guy who runs a store, in some remote part of Africa, kind of helps him develop his language skills and stuff. But he's never been out of the jungle, so he really doesn't know a whole lot about modern society. And so what you get is a Tarzan that's actually really similar to what Disney would do with the character, where he is an intelligent character capable of learning and capable of speaking correctly. But he just hasn't learned anything yet. You know, he hasn't been out of the jungle. He doesn't know anything about modern human society. And so his ape mother is killed, and then Cheetah, his chimpanzee companion, is kidnapped, and he tracks the kidnappers down to New York, where he meets Jane the Cabbie. And I love Jane in this movie so much. Obviously, she doesn't have a lot to do with her novel counterpart, but she's just so much fun. She's portrayed by Kim Crosby, who just knocks it out of the ballpark. She's this tough-talking cabbie with a heart of gold, and she, you know, sees Tarzan, and she's just like really into that, you know. And so she's like actually really sexually aggressive, and Tarzan is kind of the innocent, naive one, which is such a twist on the novels because, you know, Burroughs wrote that Tarzan, you know, knew how to perfectly kiss Jane, you know, just because he was a man. He was just born knowing how to kiss Jane. And so it's really fun to see a Tarzan who's not born knowing how to kiss Jane, you know, and Jane being the one who's like, come here, you know. And the scenes between them are just so much fun. I mean, the humor comes from just really logical places. Tarzan not understanding, you know, the terms and, you know, the technology of the world around him. And it's just, it's so sharp and it's so funny. I had to pause the movie, you know, because I laughed so hard. There's great zingers in there, like the scene where she's explaining to Tarzan what a dress code is. And Tarzan says, do I have to wear trousers? And Jane says, not on my account. And there's great situational comedy too, like Jane is going to take a shower. They're in her apartment and she hands him the remote and is like, entertain yourself. And of course, Tarzan has no idea what a remote is, and just seeing him try to figure this out and all the chaos it creates is just so much fun. And I really liked her character. You know, she picks him up in a cab and he's, you know, in his loincloth. And so she's like, you know, trying to figure out, you know, who he is and why in the world he's in a loincloth, and discovers, you know, that he's looking for his missing friend and all this stuff. And just out of the kindness of her heart, and because Tarzan is hot, decides to, you know, help him. And that's such an 80s thing. Characters were actually nice to each other in the 80s. They actually just wanted to do good just for the sake of doing good sometimes. And that's just refreshing to see. And Jane also has a dad, Archimedes Porter, who is a former cop turned security expert. And he's just this over-the-top, super macho, ball-busting cop. And he has a pretty good intro scene. He literally kicks in Jane's door and finds Tarzan and just freaks out. And it's such a great scene. You know, the father freaking out, finding the guy in a loincloth in his daughter's apartment. and he, you know, storms out and is like, Jane, dump this guy and go date a doctor. And you know, if you found your daughter with Tarzan, that is exactly the reaction you would have. I thought his character was just okay after that, but it's decently done. It doesn't overwhelm the work. And Jane and Tarzan are the main attraction here. They are an absolute joy. The scripting is so great in this first half of the movie. The second half of this movie just isn't as much fun, unfortunately. It just has a tremendous shift in tone. It becomes much more serious. Tarzan gets shot, and they have to get out the bullet, which, of course, you don't do in real life. But it just goes through all these different tropes. You know, the good guy's office gets burned down. Someone gets put in a coma. The good guys, you know, follow the clues to the bad guy. The bad guy gives them a monologue. So it's just a much more serious and just goes through these very typical action adventure tropes of 80s shows that just isn't quite as engaging. And Cheetah the chimpanzee is there, and it's the second half we actually get to see him interact with the cast. And he has a lot of scenes with Archimedes Porter. I'm not that big into monkey humor, but if you are, this may be up your alley. I will say, though, I am super, super impressed that the chimpanzee can act that well. I mean, he just takes directions phenomenally well. I mean, he's just amazing on screen. And I mean, you can just see it in this photo they took to promote the series. I mean, look at how well he's taking direction. It's just phenomenal. And it was, really cool to see Joe Lara with Cheetah, the chimpanzee, because Cheetah has such a rich history and is so iconic with the Tarzan movies that it's, I'm sure it was a real honor for Lara to actually be in a TV movie with Cheetah. And one odd thing in the movie is that Tarzan feels the urge to strip down to his loincloth every single time he goes into action. It's just really weird. They basically deal with this loincloth like it's a superhero costume, and it's sort of is. I mean, Tarzan is the precursor to superheroes, but he's not, the Batman kind of superhero who has to change clothes every time he helps someone. He's more like the Fantastic Four, who everyone knows their identity, so they only change into their costume when it makes sense. And so I wish they could have done a little bit more of that in the movie. In later, like Malibu comics, Tarzan would often, if he's in civilization, might go topless, and they would build up to the loincloth and use that, sparingly when it would make sense, when he comes back to the jungle or something like that. But this is a TV pilot, and, there are a lot of rough edges on pilots that usually get kind of refined and more developed when they end up in the series, and I suspect this probably would have been one of those. I will say, even though the last half is lacking a little bit in the humor department, it does definitely have some really cool action at the ending, because Tarzan, is sneaking into this bad guy's home in the middle of the wilderness, and at the end, there's a scene with a helicopter, and he's got a bow and arrow, and Jane's got a gun, and the bad guy is trying to hunt him down with a grenade launcher and stuff like that. It's some pretty cool stuff. Keep in mind, again, it is TV, so don't expect anything as cool or as big as you would see on the big screen, but it's still pretty cool. And so the music in this movie is pretty good too. The main theme song is what I would call jungle synthesizer music, and it's the most 80s thing ever, but it's pretty catchy. And then when Tarzan is on the plane ride to America, there's this really funny song that plays that's called Leave My Monkey Alone, that's just absolutely perfect. So would I have wanted to see this get its own series? That's kind of hard to say. It depends on how they would have done it. I like the Tarzan in here, this, innocent Tarzan learning about civilization. He's badass at times, funny at others, just always endearing. But if it was just Tarzan solving crime in Manhattan, no, I really wouldn't want to see that. I would want to see something that connects him to the jungle. And there's quite a few ways they could have done that. They could have done that through flashbacks. They could have had a B story set in the jungle that would eventually draw him back to the jungle, maybe for a season finale. Or maybe, he would have hard times adjusting and, would go back to the jungle for the season finale, and Jane would be like, oh my God, is he going to come back to me, or something like that. There's all kinds of different ways they could do that, And, I can imagine transplanting some of the stuff from the novels into Manhattan. I could imagine, like, for instance, modern day Society of Leopard Men. I could imagine, the experiments that you saw in Tarzan and the Lion Men, combining apes and men together, being done somewhere in New York. I could imagine, some good possibilities for the series. But overall, yeah, absolutely, I prefer Tarzan the Epic Adventures. I think Joe Lara ended up on a much, much better series. So while this movie has a lot of flaws, I still enjoyed it a lot more than I have most of your Me Tarzan sort of movies. And just to give an example, there is another movie on Amazon Prime called Tarzan and the Trappers. And this was coincidentally a movie made under the exact same circumstances just decades earlier. It's also a TV pilot to a TV series that never got made. But the difference here is that it's flawed without being fun. None of the characters connected with me. The action and the story just were bland. And so, yeah, I do definitely prefer something like Tarzan in Manhattan, which is written so both children and adults can enjoy it. There's a lot of sharp humor that, adults will really appreciate in that first half of the movie. And it takes itself just seriously enough to kind of get the job done. And so after this, Joe Lara would apply for the Tarzan TV series that would come next, which would be a foreign production of Tarzan. He would get turned down, and Wolf Larson would play Tarzan. He was this blonde guy, and it was more of the me Tarzan sort of stuff, and it was set in modern day times. There was a lot of environmentalism going on and stuff. But there would be a Tarzan series that would air after that, about '96, and that would be Tarzan the Epic Adventures, that would indeed star Lara as Tarzan, as an articulate Tarzan that is very close to the novels. They actually did some really, really great adaptations of Burroughs novels, and on the good episodes, it was amazing. And so I will be taking a look at that in a series of videos in the coming months. And so if anyone has any insight into why Joe Lara wore boots and why he wasn't going to return for the second season, which got canceled, let me know. I'm still trying to research some of this stuff. Probably there'll be things that will just remain mysteries, but if anyone has any insights on that, let me know. So anyway, that's all. Like and subscribe for more videos, and until next time, leave my monkey alone. See ya.